Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 684, and today is October 8th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We got a lot of news to discuss on today's show, so I'm going to jump right into it after doing the plugs. I need you guys to share the show or subscribe to it. If you're a new listener, subscribe. If you've been listening for a while, share it out and recommend the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, and I repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com. All the links for anywhere you can find the show, you can find in the show notes page, anywhere you're listening. If you're listening on YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee, you get the video version of the show, and go ahead and click the subscribe button. If you're on YouTube, you also want to hit that notification bell, or YouTube isn't going to let you know when there's a new episode of the show that's out. Additionally, you could subscribe to the show anywhere you listen to audio podcasts. And of course, the best place to follow me is on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_, where I'm sure to post and publish all my work. All right, let's start off today's show with the Libertarian Institute debrief from October 7th. I titled this one, Why Pro-Vats Woke Libertarians Support Israel. So I say here, there is an interesting segment of the libertarian space. This is a group of libertarians who were pro-COVID vats and restrictions, although they will say they did not support the government mandates, and those mandates being backed by government force. And those same libertarians have also adopted the positions of the pro-woke progressives, are now supporting the Israeli genocide in Gaza. On the surface, this may seem baffling. Multiple epidemics have broken out in Gaza. Hepatitis, polio, and cholera are infecting Gaza's children. In a recent letter, 99 American professionals who worked in the strip over the past year said almost every child under the age of 5 they encountered had both cough and watery diarrhea. And as we know, under the age of 5, cough, watery diarrhea, combined with a lack of food and potentially even starvation, can be lethal, particularly in these little kids. And so this is a real threat to the life of the Palestinian children. The 99 doctors who penned that letter said that 5.4%, 118,000 Palestinians have been killed in the past year. And so, you know, even at the worst hit stares of what COVID was supposed to be, the kill rate in Gaza over the past year is far higher than COVID. So it would seem that if coronavirus was a threat to the elderly sufficient enough to justify shutting down the American economy, maybe a plague killing Gaza's children would demand an end to U.S. support for the humanitarian crisis created by Israel, but we hear no such advocacy. Additionally, Israel is a settler colonial state. The UN, or the world government, got together in 1948 and recognized the state of Israel's existence where the people of Palestine already lived. In the following 7 decades, Tel Aviv has slowly gained a stranglehold over all of historic Palestine, slowly displacing the native people, often allowing European and American Jews to take their homes. A state that steals property of brown people to transfer it to whites based on religion sounds exactly like the kind of governments libertarian would be appalled by, but apparently not. Enter the Beltway Libertarians, led by presidential candidate Chase Oliver and Reason Magazine. To mark October 7th, Oliver took to X with a post that is riddled with mistakes and strengthens the pro-war narrative. And so I'm going to go ahead. This is Chase Oliver's post. It's a little bit lengthy, but I think you'll understand why I was so upset by it. So 1 year ago today, over 1,400 people lost their lives, and then many more were injured by the Hamas attack in Israel. In the year since, the region has seen tensions rise and war erupting. It is important to remember that it is the governments, not the people, at war with one another. People, no matter where they are, what God they pray to or not, or their cultural heritage, have common humanity. They want to see themselves safe and secure. They wish this for their families, their loved ones. They want to see stability and peace. People, all people deserve this. But governments too often make this impossible. They create lines of division. They use violence to achieve their aims. It's governments that use rocket launchers against one another as means of communication, and the people suffer. 1 year ago today, 1,400 people were another example of how continued division breeds hatred and eventually horrific violence, and the people suffer, and the governments go to war. I mourn the dead as I mourn all those who die at the hands of unjustifiable violence and force. Today, like all days, I pray we see more love than hatred. I pray for peace between all nations. I pray for the liberty of all people, and I will never start doing my part to make these prayers come to pass. Now, I mean, first of all, that could have been said by Kamala Harris. That is a bunch of pretty much absolutely nothing. There's a little bit of libertarian philosophy in there around the idea of, look, you know, most wars, when you look at the people actually shooting at each other from trench to trench, have far more in common with each other than the governments, the leaderships of the two countries have with their own soldiers, right? But I do think this war is a little bit different. If you look at the generic support that the Israeli operation receives in Gaza from the overall population, the people want, the Israeli people, a majority of them want the people of Gaza, the original native Palestinians, gone from their native land, right? Like it's not just, oh, on one side of this conflict, there's a government that hates each other, and on another side of this government, there's a government that hates each other, and they just rally each other against it's far more complicated than that. And to just dismiss it as that is shocking. Now, another thing he does that's absolutely shocking and disgusting, in his rather long post, Oliver does not mention Palestine, Palestinians, or Gaza a single time. He does mention that 1,400 Israelis were killed on October 7th twice, a number that is an overcount by 200. He also could have noted that about a third of the 1,200 Israelis killed were government soldiers, enforcing Tel Aviv's totalitarian rule imposed over the imprisoned Palestinians populating the besieged coastal enclave. Oliver goes on to say how sad the violence since October 7th has been, again without identifying Israeli aggressors, nor explaining who the victims are or even mentioning the over 118,000 Palestinians that have been killed. Perhaps worst of all, the Libertarian presidential candidate fails to discuss Washington's role in supporting Israel's apartheid regime with over $20 billion in arms and military support during the last year. So I ask, rounding up here, what is the point of calling yourself a libertarian if you won't even call out the most heinous crimes of your own government? And the answer there, I think, when you look at Cato Institute, Reason Magazine, the Chase Oliver types, it's really just because they want to be accepted within the Beltway, within Washington, D.C. And so they will accept, the most stringent dictates from Washington, even if they are completely absurd. You have the Cato Institute promoting NATO expansion at this point. Thank God Ted Galen Carpenter got out of there, and he's now with us at the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com, along with Doug Bondow. And so, just they care more about looking acceptable, and Chase Oliver care more about releasing a statement that was acceptable to the people of Washington, D.C., to the American political class, versus a statement that's going to resonate with his libertarian base, and more importantly, use his position. He has a bully pulpit right now as the Libertarian presidential candidate. He needs to be blasting Kamala Harris and Donald Trump for being a part of the uniparty that supports this war and genocide, but he's refusing to do that. All right, so I'm not just picking on the Libertarian on today's show. I got to talk about Trump and Harris as well. This one from Dave DeCamp, October 6th, antiwar.com. Trump says Israel should strike Iran's nuclear sites. So former President Donald Trump said on Friday that Israel should target Iran's nuclear facilities, criticizing President Biden for saying he didn't support such strikes. So Trump said at a campaign event in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and this is a quote, guys, and it's a Trump quote, so if it's a little bit confusing, that's how Trump speaks. So they ask him, and when Trump says that, he means Biden. They asked Biden, what do you think about Iran? Would you hit Iran? And Biden goes, as long as they don't hit the nuclear stuff, that's the thing you want to hit, right? I think he's got that one wrong. Isn't that what you're supposed to hit? I mean, it's the biggest risk we have, nuclear weapons. So the former president also claimed that soon Iran will have nuclear weapons, but there's no evidence Tehran is working to make a bomb, something that has been acknowledged by the U.S. intelligence agencies this year and has been stated repeatedly by the Iranian government that they're not working on a bomb. Iran is a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT, and all of its nuclear facilities are for civilian use. In contrast, Israel is not a signatory to the NPT and has a secret nuclear weapons program that the U.S. does not officially acknowledge, which we should note here, and I don't do this enough, and it's because in a sense, I don't think it really matters, but the U.S. government does have laws that are supposed to restrict what the U.S. government does. And as a libertarian, I think those laws are pretty important. And so things like the Leahy laws, which are supposed to prevent the U.S. from giving weapons and training and support to militaries that commit war crimes, are routinely violated in order to supply Israel with weapons. All the $23 billion in weapons that the U.S. has sent Israel this year, that's all illegal. We shouldn't be able to send that because Israel's committing war crimes with that money. Additionally, we shouldn't be able to send it because Israel is not a member of the NPT and has a unchecked nuclear weapons program, and we have laws on the books that are supposed to prevent the U.S. from providing military support to countries that are not parties to the NPT and have unregulated nuclear weapons programs. So, North Korea, right? Like Israel's nuclear weapons program, it should be considered in the same legal status according to U.S. law as North Korea's. It's just that nobody cares and nobody enforces those laws. And so I often leave that unsaid on the show just because I could say it 100 times and it doesn't feel like it's going to change anything, but I should say it occasionally and mention it because it is important that we are breaking U.S. law with our support to Israel. So it's estimated that Israel has somewhere between 90 and 300 nuclear warheads. Trump's comments about Iran's nuclear sites come as the world's anticipating an Israeli attack on Iran in retaliation for the Iranian missile barrage that was fired at Israel last week, which was a response to several Israeli escalations in the region. The U.S. is closely coordinating with Israel on its plans to attack Iran and is expected to participate in some way, whether by sharing intelligence or more direct participation. Biden said the possibility of striking Iran's nuclear or oil infrastructure was being discussed, though he cautioned against the idea. If I were in their shoes, I'd be thinking about alternatives than striking the oil fields. All right, but so we'll kind of see what the Biden administration ends up approving or what the Israelis end up doing. It's kind of unclear how this is all going to play out at this point. I thought we would see the Israeli response on October 7th. That didn't happen. Maybe Israel needs a little bit more of a surprise to bypass Iran's nuclear facilities. That's possible. All right, so Chase Oliver, terrible on the issue. Donald Trump, terrible on the issue. And Kamala Harris, no surprise, terrible on the issue. This one from Dave DeCamp, October 7th, antiwar.com. Harris defends providing military aid to Israel amid major escalations. So Vice President Kamala Harris has defended the Biden administration's continued military aid to Israel amid major Israeli escalations in Lebanon and the relentless onslaught in the Gaza Strip. Harris said in an interview with 60 Minutes, the aid that we just have given Israel allowed Israel to defend itself against 200 ballistic missiles that were meant to attack the Israelis and the people of Israel. And when we think about the threat that Hezbollah presents Iran, I think it is without any question our imperative to do what we can to allow Israel to defend itself against those kind of attacks. So it's kind of crazy that she just said that Israel was able to shoot down 200 Iranian ballistic missiles with aid that the U.S. provided when the U.S. is providing things like taint shells. And how does she explain how a taint shell was used to intercept a ballistic missile? She's got nothing there. So Harris made the comments when asked if the U.S. had any sway over Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The interviewer noted Netanyahu had done many things the Biden administration said it imposed, including the escalation in Lebanon. The U.S. hasn't put any real pressure on Netanyahu to change course since it keeps providing Israel with with weapons for military operations. Harris claimed the U.S. would push Israel to reach a hostage deal and a ceasefire with Hamas, but the administration hasn't publicly criticized Netanyahu for doing everything he can to sabotage the chances of an agreement. When pressed further about Netanyahu, Harris said, "The work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what is needed to happen in the region." So that's a very Kamala Harris-esque answer. This is, by the way, the first time this 60 Minutes interview, since becoming the Democratic presidential candidate, that any interviewer has even remotely pushed Kamala Harris. She's notoriously not taken interviews or have been on like these lady talk show things where like, you know, they laugh and have fun and it's all a good old Kamala Harris time situation. But this was a real sit-down interview, Kamala Harris one-on-one with somebody who I don't want to say wanted to hold her accountable, but had answers that he wanted her to answer, and she simply couldn't do it. So when asked if the U.S. had a close ally in Netanyahu, Harris said, "I think with all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes." Harris has been a staunch supporter of Israel throughout her political career and has vowed the U.S. will continue providing military aid to Israel if she is elected in November. Now, next up, I want to get into this article that I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on October 7th, because I think it ties in and debunks some of the statements that Harris made during her 60 Minutes interview. So, White House ignored warnings from Pentagon, State Department that Israel was creating a catastrophe in Gaza. So, recently released emails from Reuters show that officials in the White House ignored warnings from their counterparts in the Defense and State Departments, warning that Israel was committing war crimes and creating a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Reuters reviewed emails from the Department of Defense and State from last October, showing that high-ranking officials warned about supporting Israel as it committed war crimes in Gaza. So Reuters reported, as Israel pounded northern Gaza with airstrikes last October and ordered the evacuation of more than 1 million Palestinians from the area, a senior Pentagon official delivered a blunt warning to the White House. The mass evacuation would be a humanitarian disaster and could violate international law, leading to war crimes charges against Israel. The warning came from Dana Stroul, then Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, in an October 13th email sent to the senior White House aides. She explained that assessment by the International Committee of the Red Cross had left her chilled to the bone. Stroul and other officials were pushing the White House to take a more sympathetic position on the Palestinians' suffering and ask Israel to give Gazans more time to comply with Tel Aviv's evacuation order. While the Biden administration and just Harris on 60 Minutes claims it did pressure Israel earlier in the onslaught and that it did make a difference, Reuters reports that the White House had little impact on Tel Aviv's military operations. And so this is a quote from the article, "But Washington was slow to address the suffering of Palestinians," said 3 senior U.S. officials involved in the decision-making process. And while the ground invasion was ultimately delayed by about 10 days, the 3 officials attributed the pause more to operational preparations by the Israeli military than U.S. pressure. In one concerning email exchange, officials asked the White House to pressure Israel to extend the deadline for 1 million Palestinians to leave northern Gaza beyond 24 hours. A top Biden official, Brett McGurk, responded by telling the officials who sent him the email to prepare Egypt to receive refugees from Gaza. So Reuters reports, in an email replying to Stroul, McGirt said Washington might be able to persuade Israel to extend the deadline for Palestinians to evacuate beyond 24 hours, saying the administration can buy some time, but the Red Cross, the UN, and aid agencies should work with Egypt to prepare for the evacuation, he wrote. So when the request for a more sympathetic position towards the Palestinians was relayed to the White House, that was also rejected. Reuters reports the State Department's top Middle East diplomat, Barbara Leaf, sent an email to the White House officials, including McGurk, And her main concern was the damage Israel's onslaught in Gaza, along with U.S. support, was doing to Washington's relationship with its Middle East partners. McGurk interpreted the email as a request for a ceasefire and simply replied no. So the U.S. isn't doing anything to pressure Israel or doing anything to make the situation any better for the Palestinians. All right, next up, this is from the Jerusalem Post. Israel will try to force 250,000 Palestinians from northern Gaza. So the Jerusalem Post reports that Tel Aviv has potentially adopted a slow-moving version of the general's plan to remove all Palestinians from northern Gaza. And this is a quote from the article. Sunday's move by the IDF appeared to be an in-between position of moving a significant portion of the 150,000 to 250,000 Palestinian civilians out of northern Gaza without going all the way to the general's plan. Alternatively, this move could prelude towards a gradual and creeping evacuation of all of northern Gaza, but in a slower motion in order to reduce global opposition, especially in the U.S. And so what it appears the Israeli media is admitting is that Israel has kicked off its plan and has implemented this plan. What they're going to do is they're going to announce an evacuation order, and this has already been done for all of northern Gaza. At that point, the U.S. is going to, at that point, Israel will say anyone who didn't comply with the evacuation order is a member of Hamas or a terrorist supporter, and they're going to cut off all aid, all the food and everything going to northern Gaza. And so everybody is going to either starve or leave. It's going to be an absolute humanitarian catastrophe and the worst thing imaginable. And it's been done, as we'll talk about here, with $23 billion US. So this day, DeCamp, October 7th, antiwar.com. Support for Israel has cost US taxpayers at least $22.76 billion in 1 year. So support for Israel's onslaught in Gaza and other escalations in the Middle East has cost the U.S. at least $22.76 billion since October 7th, according to Brown University's Cost of War Project, and in a paper that they published on Monday. So cost of war reached that number, which is a very conservative estimate, by combining the cost of U.S. military aid to Israel and the cost of related U.S. military operations in the region, including the war against the Houthis in Yemen. The report found the U.S. government has approved at least $17.9 billion in military aid to support Israeli military operations in Gaza and elsewhere in the region over the past year, significantly more than any other year since the U.S. began providing the military aid to Israel in 1959. The paper also notes the difficulty of tracking U.S. military support for Israel due to the Biden administration's lack of transparency. The paper says, for instance, the Biden administration has made at least 100 arms deals with Israel since October of 2023 that fell below the value that would have triggered the requirement to notify Congress of all the details. And so this is an intentional deception of the American people, right? There are specific laws that Congress has written that says that if the Biden or if any White House wants to sell weapons to any other country, you know, if it's over, I forget what the number is, I think it's a few $1 million, then you have to notify Congress. And so what the Biden administration has done is transferred hundreds of millions, at least dollars of weapons to Israel by doing it a few $1 million at a time. And so they don't have to notify Congress, they don't have to notify the American people. And so that the U.S. want to send Israel some tank shells, well, we'll authorize them 100 or 50 at a time to keep us below the cap that we would have to report it. And in this way, we could approve over the course of probably hours or days, 100 different arms sales to Israel, but never have to tell the American people or Congress about it. The $17.9 billion also does not include a major $23 billion arms sale that the State Department approved for Israel in August, since the money will be spent in the coming years. It's also unclear at this time how much of that $20.3 billion, which includes $18.8 billion deal for F-15 fighter jets will be covered by U.S. military aid. The paper details how the U.S. provided Israel with weapons for decades. It says the U.S. has been Israel's top arms supplier for over 5 decades. Israel is the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. aid in the world since World War II, and it is in the midst of a 10-year, $38 billion military aid agreement, which was negotiated under the Obama administration, covering fiscal years 2019 to 2028. The report says that the U.S. has spent at least $4.8 billion of its own money on military operations in the Middle East, including $2.4 billion on intercepting Houthi missiles and drones and launching missile strikes against Yemen, and another $2.4 billion for spending on U.S. operations in the region, including in the $95 billion foreign military aid bill that President Biden signed into law in April. The paper adds another $50 to $70 million in additional combat pay for U.S. military personnel. You had to imagine when you start to talk about the peer and then all the additional U.S. troops that have been deployed to the region, the number's probably even higher than this. The cost for the U.S. taxpayer will continue to rise as there's no end in sight to the Israeli genocidal war in Gaza or its bombing campaign in Lebanon. The risks of a full-blown war with Iran are also extremely high, as the U.S. is coordinating with Israel on its plan to attack Iran in retaliation for the Iranian missile barrage that hit Israel last week, which was a response to several Israeli escalations. The U.S. bombing campaign in Yemen has also failed to deter the Houthis, who have vowed they will only stop their attacks on shipping if there was a ceasefire in Gaza. And of course, the U.S. won't ask Netanyahu to do that. All right, let's talk about the situation in Lebanon here before we wrap up. Israeli strikes kill over 100 children in Lebanon in 11 days. So at least 100 children have been killed by Israeli strikes in Lebanon since Israel dramatically escalated attacks in the country on September 23rd, the UN Child Relief Agency, or UNICEF, said on Friday. Citing Lebanon's health ministry, UNICEF said that 127 children have been killed by Israeli strikes in Lebanon over the past year, with more than 100 dying between September 23rd and October 1st. Israeli attacks on Lebanon have wounded at least 890 children since October 8th, 2023. So UNICEF's director for the Middle East said, "Doctors tell us of treating children who are bloodied, bruised, and broken, suffering both physically and mentally. Many experience anxiety, flashbacks, and nightmares related to explosions. No child should be subject to such a horrific situation." The number of child casualties in Lebanon has likely risen since Friday as Israel continues to pound Lebanon. Israel launched its heaviest bombing yet on Beirut from Saturday into Sunday, with about 30 strikes reported in the city's southern suburbs. Lebanon's children have also been suffering massive displacement crisis in the wake of Israel's escalations. Lebanon's government said that more than 1.2 million people had been displaced, including 400,000 children. Similar to Israel's assault on Gaza, Israeli warplanes have bombed evacuation routes in Lebanon, including the Masada border crossing, which connects Lebanon and Syria. Israeli strikes on the crossing early Friday severely damaged the road, forcing Lebanon's fleeing into Syria to travel by foot. So just horror after horror after horror, and so many are unnecessary. Along with all those children being killed, an American man was killed by the Israeli bombardment of Lebanon. So I wrote this one for the Institute on October 6th. A Michigan man is more than one of 1,000 people in southern Lebanon killed by Israel over the past 2 weeks. Israel has conducted massive bombardments of its northern neighbor, often using American weapons to perform the operations. Kamala Harris Jawad was killed in southern Lebanon Tuesday morning, according to his family. He frequently made trips to southern Lebanon where he provided financial support and other assistance to the people of the region. Israel has ramped up its attacks on Lebanon over the past several weeks. Last month, Tel Aviv conducted multiple widespread terror attacks by planting explosives and small electronic devices. Then, Israel killed Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah after he accepted a ceasefire deal. The assassination of Nasrallah kicked off a large-scale bombing campaign and a ground invasion of southern Lebanon. Israel has hit a number of civilian targets, often claiming some kind of Hezbollah assets were hidden in the homes or other structures. The State Department said it was aware and alarmed regarding Joel Wald's death, but did not go on to condemn or threaten Tel Aviv for the murder. Throughout the Joe Biden administration, there has been a distinct difference in the reaction compared to when Americans have been killed by Israel or if they were killed by a militant in a resistance group. For example, the State Department regularly mentions Americans who were captured and killed by Hamas on October 7th to justify the U.S. support for Israel. However, when Israeli forces have killed Americans, the White House allows Tel Aviv to investigate itself and accepts the often dubious results of the inquiry that absolves Israeli forces of any wrongdoing. And we could look at Omar Assad, Shireen Abu Akleh, the young Turkish-American protester who was killed in the West Bank recently, as all examples of Americans who have been killed by Israel with no repercussions whatsoever. All right, next up here, this one from Jason Ditz, October 7th, antiwar.com. Israeli airstrikes kill at least 10 firefighters in southern Lebanese town. So at least 10 firefighters were killed in the southern Lebanon town of Barachit, were killed overnight when the municipality building they were in was hit by an Israeli airstrike. Israel has not commented directly on the attack, insisting it only targeted Hezbollah-controlled buildings in southern Lebanon. The firefighters were preparing to respond to the ongoing Israeli attacks across Lebanon when their building was hit. Rescue operations continue with victims trapped in the rubble. Rescue workers already came under repeated Israeli attacks in southern Lebanon before the recent Israeli invasion. Now, with attacks on rescue personnel increasing, their grim numbers will add to the total casualties in the war zone. And this does seem to be intentional. Israel is basically saying that if we think we hit a militant in the region, we're going to prevent rescue workers from getting there so they can't save whoever we killed, which of course is causing problems, killing rescue workers, firefighters, paramedics. But also, if they didn't hit a militant target and was a civilian target, then they're, forcing those civilians to bleed out and die trapped beneath the rubble. So officials say 118 rescue workers have been killed in Israeli attacks on Lebanon over the past year, with more than 50 killed in just the past week. Caretaker Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati has called on the international community to pressure Israel to allow rescue workers to safely access sites of previously strikes to rescue civilians. Monday reports from Lebanon media are that the Israeli attacks today are centered in the area around Tyre. The area that was hit is further to the east. It is not known to be an active area with evacuation orders at the time of the overnight strike, but seemingly any area in Lebanon might be the next target. Israel has been waging a war in Gaza for a year now and has escalated into Lebanon, Syria, and elsewhere in the region. It is not known what the goals of all this warfare are, but the escalation seems to be the order of the day. All right, everybody. That's where I'm wrapping up the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll be back with more for the rest of the week.